Daniela, a particular pleasure to be interviewed by you, particularly because you take the time to do the research about the people that you interview. It's a real pleasure to field questions from you, however tough they may be.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to have some really good conversation here. I saw we were on the same wavelength because I thoroughly enjoyed the recent comments from Charlie Munger, and I saw that you were also commenting about them. So I thought, what a great way to start this conversation, though we have a lot of other topics to cover. But first, he came out saying that inflation is a very serious subject. You could argue it's the way democracies die. It's a huge danger, citing hyperinflation as a cause of the collapse of the Roman Empire. He went on to say it's the biggest long-range danger we have, probably apart from nuclear war, said the 98-year-old Munger, who's still sharp as a tack. Do you agree with these statements? How dangerous is the inflationary environment?
I do agree with the statement, and I think it's useful that the statement came from Charlie Munger. It didn't come from a libertarian or an anarcho-capitalist. It came from a political pragmatist who has made his fortune making larger fortunes for other people. So I think in this instance, it's important to remember the credibility and the bias of the person who made the statement. That isn't always the case, but in this case, I think it's really germane to the statement. What Munger says in the interview explicitly is that inflation is a consequence of the politicization of society. The fact that disputes are settled by government, the fact that commercial exchange is arranged by government, the fact that democracies become clientelist. What happens in a clientelist, government-centric environment is that payment, well, let me put it differently, benefits and programs are very popular, but paying for those programs is very unpopular. What societies inevitably do is vote themselves benefits, but leave the cost to the next generation, the unborn, or the politically powerless. When Charlie Munger talked about the fact that the electorate gets what they want, mostly good and hard, he was referring to Weimar Germany, where the outcome of socialism, the outcome of unfunded benefits, the outcome of solving disputes politically, rather than allowing the messy markets to solve them, the outcome of that was Adolf Hitler. The fact that Munger was willing to say that the outcome of excessive government in Weimar Germany, the outcome of the distribution of wealth by fiat rather than by utility, was Hitler, was an extremely powerful statement.
I thought so. I agree, thoroughly agree. And, of course, there were other powerful statements. He was also asked his thoughts on rating the Fed in essence of how they're combating the. He said that, too much money has been thrown at the problem. He says he doesn't criticize the Fed, saying it's a hard to make, and they kind of had to react quickly. But that too much money has been thrown at them.
The truth is that over 35% of every currency, which is to say dollar, in the United States has been created in the last 2.5 years. That's quantitative easing. It is not like they printed currency to accommodate an expanding economy. It's not like the economy has grown by 35%. Society's political goals couldn't occur without debasing the currency. In other words, we're spending our children's future. That's what inflation is always about. Negative interest rates, if you think about it, negative real interest rates are a function of you saving and foregoing consumption. Lending your money to me so that I can consume now, trusting me to pay you back and accepting the fact that I pay you back less than you paid me. Munger didn't say it in those terms, but what inflation really is about right now is negative real interest rates, debt and deficits, and quantitative easing. And there seems to be widespread acceptance among the voters and among the political class to have their cake and eat it too, which is to say, vote themselves all kinds of benefits, solve disputes politically in Congress, solve distribution politically in Congress, and not pay for it.
Just one more quote from Munger I want to share with you. He says, I think the safe assumption for an investor in this current environment is that over the next 100 years, the currency is going to zero. That is my working hypothesis. And had I been the journalist conducting that, I probably would have probed him more on that comment, which I thought was quite interesting. I've talked about all currencies end up going to zero. But I want to know what comes after that.
Well, let's look what came before it first, Daniela. You are a working journalist. If you look at the last 100 years, we didn't quite achieve Mr. Munger's goals. The purchasing power of the currency has only declined by 98%. But the fact that the purchasing power of the currency over 100 years, the last 100 years, fell by 98%, causes one to wonder. Let's say, just for fun, that Mr. Munger is apocalyptic and he's wrong. Let's say that the purchasing power of the currency only falls by 98% again. It is not a happy circumstance. It is not a happy circumstance. And let's look at the rate of increase of the problem. Let's look at the fact that the last time we had an inflationary difficulty in the United States in the 1970s, that government debt to GDP was around 25%. Now government debt to GDP is around 100%, 120%, pardon me. The tools available to combat inflation at the same time that government fulfills its historic roles becomes tougher and tougher and tougher because we've spent our future.
And I guess beyond Munger, St. Louis Federal Reserve President James Bullard cautioned, along the same wavelengths, that without action on interest rates, inflation could become an even more serious problem. Quote, he says, we're at more risk now than we've been in a generation, and this could get out of control. And he has called for a full percentage point in rate hikes by July. My question to you is it enough? Is anything they do at this point enough?
Well, they could stop spending. Government is a source of major demand, so they could stop spending, which would, I think, halt inflation in its tracks. They won't, but they could. Would 100 basis points be enough to halt inflation? Of course not. At present, the consumer price index, depending on how you figure it, is between 6.5% and 7%. Escalating, which is to say the purchasing power of the currency is declining by 6.5% or 7% a year, while the interest rate paid on the world's benchmark security, the US 10-year Treasury, is at 2%. That 4.5% negative yield is what forces to combat inflation. Inflation, from the average person's point of view, is simply the deterioration of the purchasing power of their savings and investment assets. Think about the fact, Daniela, that don't focus for a second on the US 10-year Treasury, although I led with it. Focus on the fact that the junk bond, that is credit compromised public bonds, now yields 4.7%. In an environment where the purchasing power of the currency is declining between 6.5% and 7.5%. In other words, people are guaranteed a loss before credit quality by buying junk bonds. If that isn't inflationary, what could possibly be? You have an incentive to spend, not to save. That's the nature of inflation.
I always like making things relatable, so I want to know if the current scenario keeps you up at night, Rick. Are you over this environment?
I wouldn't say losing sleep. It's certainly a concern. It's certainly part of what I try to do with Rule US. I talk to 68,000 people fairly frequently about the fact that you're going to have to change your investing habits. If you have conditioned yourself over the last 40 years to be a bond investor because interest rates fall, so the capitalized values of distributions increase, you're going to have to change how you invest. The idea that you're getting a 2% safe yield in a currency that's depreciating in value by 6.5% means that over the course of 5 years in a so-called safe savings instrument, you will have lost a third of your purchasing power. For myself, Daniela, that's less of an issue. I took control of my own finances in the 1980s. So at least at age 69, for the rest of my life and my wife's life, I'm fairly secure. I feel real concern for 68,000 people in my database who have begun to listen to me about how they might conduct their own affairs in the context of the economic circumstance that we face now. I feel real concern for them.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3,000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.